My name is Kristen. I'm sitting in my new condo in Seattle, a place that's truly mine for the first time. The memories of what happened a few weeks ago still feel raw, like an open wound that's slowly starting to heal. It all began at my birthday dinner. The restaurant was a picture-perfect setting, just like my mother had described. The private room was bathed in warm amber light, with white tablecloths and glassware arranged as if from a high-end catalog. I arrived after a long day at work, still in my work clothes, my hair a bit disheveled from the Seattle breeze. My family was already there. My mother, Victoria, was as controlling as ever. She gave me a quick once-over and then immediately turned to smooth my sister Ava's hair. Ava, always the apple of my parents' eye, flashed me a carefree smile, completely oblivious to the undercurrents in our family. My father, Henry, sat quietly, sipping his wine, while my grandfather, Walter, watched everything with an unreadable expression. Dinner started like every other family gathering. Ava talked about her latest adventure, a weekend getaway that my parents had paid for. My mother beamed with pride, and my father chuckled in agreement. I focused on cutting my food, trying to ignore the subtle jabs. Victoria commented on how independent I'd become, as if it was a result of my own poor choices rather than circumstances. Across the table, Ava twirled a delicate gold bracelet, a gift I'd never received. I couldn't help but think of all the times I'd struggled. When my car broke down on the highway and I begged my mother for help, she simply said, "You're an adult. Figure it out." I had to max out a credit card to pay for the tow truck, and I'm still paying it off. In college, when I couldn't afford textbooks, my mother refused to help, saying it wasn't fair to Ava. Meanwhile, Ava's high school trip to Asia was paid for in full before she even packed. As the dinner went on, I felt a low hum of unease in my bones. Something was shifting, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Then, when the server refilled our glasses and the room grew a bit quieter, my grandfather lifted his glass. "Kristen," he said gently, "show me how you've used your $3 million trust fund after 25 years. The reaction was immediate. Laughter stopped mid-breath. Forks froze. Even the candles seemed to hold still. I felt my heart pounding in my ears as I whispered, "I never got one." My grandfather's smile faded. His lawyer, Mr. Thompson, stepped forward and placed a thick stack of statements on the table with a heavy thud. In that moment, I realized that someone at the table was afraid, someone who shouldn't have been. My mother's face flickered from confusion to panic, and then she plastered on a stiff smile. My father lowered his glass so fast it clinked against the table. Ava giggled, thinking it was a joke. But I knew it wasn't. I asked, "What trust fund?" My grandfather's smile faltered. "The one I set up for you when you were 3, he said. My throat tightened, and my voice came out as a barely audible whisper, "I never got one." Silence filled the room. Ava's smile fell apart. My father's jaw clenched, and my mother stared at me as if I'd spoken a foreign language. I realized then that the truth had been stolen from me. The dinner didn't end, it simply shattered. Chairs scraped, voices tangled, and the room felt too small to hold all the lies that were now spilling into the air. My mother was the first to recover. She said to my grandfather, "I'm sure Kristen misunderstood. She's always been so distracted." As if I'd imagined 28 years of struggling alone. My grandfather looked at me and said, "Meet me tomorrow morning at my office at 10 o'clock. It wasn't a question. I walked out of the restaurant before anyone could stop me. The cold Seattle air hit my chest like a fist, but I kept walking. I didn't cry or scream, I just repeated the words, "I never got one." By the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking. My roommate, Maya, texted me, asking how dinner was. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. The silence told her everything. "Come home," she said. "We'll sort it out." But deep down, I knew this was something that had been carefully hidden for a long time. The next morning, I took the early bus into downtown Seattle. The city was just waking up, with fog hugging the sidewalks and streetlights flickering out one by one. My grandfather's office was on the upper floor of a glass tower. It was quiet and warm, with a faint smell of cedar and old books. He was waiting for me in a leather chair, a folder on his knee. His expression wasn't angry, it was worse, disappointed. "I set up a trust fund for you when you were 3, he said. $3 million to keep you safe and give you choices. You should have had access when you turned 18. My heart dropped. I'd spent my 18th birthday working a shift at a convenience store. I asked, why didn't I know about it? My voice cracked. My grandfather handed me the folder. Inside was a preliminary audit, filled with lines of withdrawals, transfers, and payments, all signed by my parents, Victoria and Henry. They hadn't just hidden my trust fund, they'd used it for 25 years. Mortgage payments, home upgrades, Ava's tuition, her apartment, vacations, car expenses, and luxury purchases, all things I could never afford. I felt a burning sensation behind my ribs, a mix of anger, grief, and humiliation. My grandfather leaned forward and said, I hired a legal team. Mr. Thompson will run a full audit, but I need you to decide how far this goes. I stared at the small, neat signatures of the 2 people who were supposed to protect me. I want everything, I said. Every record, every receipt, every dollar. I want the truth. My grandfather nodded firmly. Then we'll ask them to come in for a meeting. I told him I wanted to be there, and he promised I would. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the quiet, forgotten daughter. I was walking towards the fire, and this time, I wasn't going to be the one burned. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. The sky was a dull gray, and the air was heavy. My grandfather insisted it take place in a private conference room in his building, saying it was neutral territory. But I knew he wanted every moment to be documented. I arrived early. My palms were sweating, but my steps were steady. Maya had hugged me before I left the apartment, saying I looked like someone stepping into a courtroom and a new beginning at the same time. I didn't understand what she meant until I saw my reflection in the elevator glass. My posture was straight, my face was calm, and my eyes held a resolve I'd never seen before. When the elevator doors opened, Mr. Thompson was waiting. He looked as tidy as ever, with his gray hair and tailored suit, a stack of documents under his arm. He nodded, as if he'd already judged my emotional state to be stable enough for what was to come. They're on their way, he said. Inside the conference room, my grandfather sat at the head of the table. His face was hard to read, but the tension in his jaw told me he'd barely slept. When he saw me, his expression softened a bit. He reached for my hand, squeezed it, and then let go. You're not alone today, he said. The door opened, and my parents entered first. Victoria walked quickly, her shoulders stiff, her face in that familiar mask of innocence. Henry followed, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape. Ava came behind them, clutching her purse, a look of confusion and worry on her face. My father started, I don't know what this is about, but dragging us into some formal. My grandfather held up a hand and simply said, sit. Mr. Thompson closed the door behind them, walked to the center of the room, and placed a thick stack of statements on the table. The sound echoed off the walls. Ava flinched, my father swallowed hard, and my mother's eyes widened. Those are your signatures, Mr. Thompson said. Over 25 years of withdrawals, transfers, and payments from the trust fund intended for Kristen. The room went silent. Then Mr. Thompson began to read. Year 1, mortgage payments. Year 2, home repairs, kitchen remodel. He flipped a page. Tuition payments, not for Kristen. Car expenses, travel expenses, credit card balances, apartment rent for Ava. With every word, something inside me unfurled. It wasn't joy or anger, it was clarity. I finally saw the full picture, not the shadows I'd been shown all these years. My mother's face turned pale. "This is being taken out of context," she said. Mr. Thompson didn't blink. "The context is financial abuse of a beneficiary. The audit is complete." My father finally spoke, his voice thin. "We used the money for the family. It wasn't personal." I couldn't help but laugh. "Not personal? When my car broke down and I begged for help, was that not personal? When I almost dropped out of college because I couldn't afford textbooks, was that your idea of family?" My mother drew in a breath. "Kristen, we always intended to put the money back." I snapped, "When? When I'm 40, 50, or never?" My grandfather leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "You stole from a child." My mother's throat bobbed. "Dad, we had bills." My grandfather replied, "We all have bills, but not everyone steals from their own daughter to pay them." Ava finally spoke, her voice cracking. "Mom, Dad, you used her money for my apartment, for my school." My mother said, "Sweetheart, we wanted you to have every opportunity." I whispered, "And I didn't." My mother turned to me, her eyes filled with panic, not remorse. "Kristen, you've always been so independent. You never asked for much." I leaned in. "I didn't ask because you told me I couldn't. Every time I came to you, you made me feel like needing anything was a burden." The silence that followed was full of all the things they couldn't deny. My grandfather tapped the table firmly. "I am revoking your financial authority effective immediately." My mother jolted. "You can't do that." "I can," my grandfather said coldly. "And I have." My father sagged into his chair, as if the weight of 25 years had finally landed on him. Ava stared at the table, her hands covering her mouth. Mr. Thompson slid another set of documents towards me. "This transfers full control of the remaining trust assets to you. Your parents' access is terminated permanently." My mother's breath hitched, my father closed his eyes, and Ava whispered, "Oh my God." My hand hovered over the pen. For a moment, I wasn't signing a document, I was signing a truth. I pressed my name onto the page. My mother stood up, her chair scraping violently. "Kristen, please, this will ruin us." I looked up at her and said, "Then maybe you shouldn't have built your life on money that wasn't yours." Her mouth opened and closed, and her legs shook. My father reached out to steady her, but his hand trembled too. They nearly collapsed. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I wasn't the quiet daughter holding the family together anymore. I was the one tearing down the lie they'd built. After the meeting, the room felt hollow. My parents walked out first, my mother trembling, my father trying to support her. Ava lingered, looking at me with a mix of guilt and something like apology. She whispered, "I didn't know, Kristen." I nodded. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. Over the next few weeks, everything changed. Mr. Thompson finalized the legal transfers. The remaining trust assets were secured in my name. My parents were notified of potential civil consequences if they tried to interfere. My grandfather visited me in my new condo. He walked slowly through the rooms, touching the walls, and smiling softly. "You deserve this," he said. "You deserved it all along." I didn't tell him that I'd cried the first night I slept there, a mix of grief for the family I never had and relief for the life I could finally build. I've learned that family isn't defined by blood or last names. It's about honesty, accountability, and the people who stand by you when the truth comes out. I don't hate my parents, and I don't think I ever will. But I've also learned that distance can be an act of love for myself, for the life I'm finally allowed to build, and for the peace I'll never give up again. If you've ever had to step away from people who should have cared for you, know that you're not alone. Your story matters, and your boundaries matter. Share your experiences in the comments. And if this story has touched you, follow the channel so you don't miss the next one.